For 2 years, I lived in the illusion of a devoted marriage until New York revealed the truth my husband thought he'd buried. His lover wasn't just a secret. She was a weapon he wielded to humiliate me, dismiss me, and erase me from my own life. But he never understood what silence can do in the hands of a woman who has nothing left to lose. My revenge wasn't loud or reckless. It was precise, patient, and delivered with the kind of calm that terrifies guilty men. And when the truth finally detonated, I walked away untouched while he watched his world collapse from the ruins he built himself. New York has a way of swallowing sound at night. Not completely, just enough to make you question what's real, what's imagined, and what's quietly unraveling beneath the surface. I've always thought the city reflected people more than it reflected light. The way the sidewalks hold secrets, the way windows glimmer with half-truths, the way steel and glass can look calm while everything inside burns. That night, I didn't know my life was about to split open. I only felt a small shift, like a thread pulling from the hem of a dress. I should have tugged back. But I didn't. Not yet. My name is Clara. I've been married for 2 years, 24 months of devotion, stability, and what I once believed was unshakable loyalty. On paper, it looked perfect. 2 careers intertwining in a Manhattan apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a refrigerator always stocked with Pellegrino. A husband who said all the right words. A life that looked complete when posted online, but perfection is a costume, and some people wear theirs too comfortably. He was late coming home. Again, the clock on the stove blinked 11:47 p.m., its blue light painting the kitchen tiles in a cold glow. I waited at the dining table, a book open but unread, my tea cooling beside me. The city hummed outside, gentle, distracted, unaware. When the front door finally clicked open, I didn't look up at first. I just listened. The sound of his shoes, the hesitation in his breath, the way he paused in the hallway too long for a man simply tired. When did he stop moving like someone who belonged here? A thought I didn't want. He walked into the kitchen, suit jacket over one arm, tie loose. He kissed the top of my head lightly, barely brushing me, like he was afraid of leaving evidence. "You're still up," he murmured. I didn't describe my worry. I didn't ask why he smelled faintly of someone else's perfume, the kind with a sweeter bass note than mine. I only closed the book and offered a soft smile. I wanted to say goodnight. A normal sentence. A normal moment. The kind that makes betrayal harder to see because it hides behind routine. But when he walked past me, I felt it, the unsettling shift I would look back on later as the first warning. The next morning, he rushed through his routine. He didn't touch me. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even look at me fully. Just at angles, as if I'd turned into something that reflected too much. He left with a mumbled, "Busy day." Meaningless. Harmless. But it sat in my chest like an object I couldn't swallow. I watched him from the window as he crossed the street. Shoulders tense, phone already in his hand. He wasn't checking emails. I could tell by the speed, the focus, the way he curved his body slightly away from anyone who could see the screen. I didn't follow him. Not then, not yet. But the moment he vanished into the crowd, something inside me twisted. Not fear, not anger, something colder. Observation. A quiet skill I never knew I had. That day, the city seemed unusually sharp. Cars honked like accusations. Skyscrapers mirrored distrust. People rushed past with secrets tucked under their coats. And I moved through it all with a hollow calm, as if preparing for a truth I couldn't name. I visited my favorite cafe near Union Square, the one with the old brick interior and the barista who always remembered my order. But even the warm smell of roasted beans failed to soften the tension running through me. Something was wrong. Something was beginning. But beginnings never announce themselves. They creep silently, settling into corners of your life like dust you don't see until sunlight exposes it. That afternoon, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Not hidden. Just, not removed. A restaurant we'd never been to together. A place known for dim lighting and tables built for intimacy. I ran my thumb over the printed date. 2 days ago. A night he claimed he was in meetings. I told myself it could be business. It should be business. It had to be business, right? But the second line on the receipt changed everything. Champagne for 2. And something inside me froze cold, clean, precise. A sensation I didn't yet understand but would soon rely on. A sensation that would eventually guide my revenge. I should have confronted him. Instead, I waited. Because in that moment, I realized something unsettling. My husband wasn't just lying. He was getting comfortable with it. And a comfortable liar is far more dangerous than a guilty one. He came home smelling like hotel soap. Not ours. Not his office bathroom's citrus blend. Hotel soap. He walked toward me with eyes too bright, too careful. He asked about my day with a rehearsed smile. He moved through the apartment like a man trying to disguise footsteps. And I watched, quietly, the way a painter studies shadows. The way a hunter studies breath. Not because I had proof. Not because I had certainty. But because my instincts, those soft, feminine whispers so often dismissed, were starting to rise. Something was breaking. Not loud. Not chaotic. But with a slow, sickening precision. Around midnight, when he thought I was asleep, he left the bedroom to take a call. I didn't follow. I didn't eavesdrop. I simply listened to the silence between his words. Silence always tells the truth before people do. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow collapse of a life I'd built with both hands. 2 years of devotion. 2 years of choosing him. 2 years of trust he was now trading for someone else's touch. But here's the strange thing about heartbreak: it doesn't hit all at once. It starts as a small, dull ache, then grows into something sharp enough to carve you open. I felt the ache that night, but the blade was coming. I could sense it. Before he slipped back into bed, I made myself a quiet promise. If he's betraying me, I won't fall apart. I won't scream. I won't beg. I'll learn him. I'll study him. And when the time comes, I'll walk away with everything he tried to take. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that tiny vow whispered into the dark, was the beginning of the end for him. And the beginning of my awakening. Tension doesn't walk into your life like a storm. It seeps quiet, patient, a slow leak under a locked door. By the time you notice the floor is wet, the damage is already spreading. That's how the second week began. The week where silence became heavier than suspicion. The week where I started watching him with the same focus I once saved for love. He woke earlier than usual, 5:12 a.m. Not to exercise, not to get ahead on work. He moved like a man trying to escape something. Maybe me. Maybe his own guilt. I pretended to sleep, lids low, breathing soft. He hovered beside the bed for a moment, staring at me with an expression I couldn't decode. Not tenderness. Not guilt. Something irritated. As if my presence was a reminder of a responsibility he didn't want anymore. He left without kissing me goodbye. He closed the door too gently. Guilt would have made it slam. Irritation would have made it careless. But this was neither. It was calculation. I knew, then, that something in our dynamic had changed. And I wasn't the one who changed it. By mid-morning, I found myself pacing the apartment. The same apartment we'd chosen together. The same one he insisted had perfect light and perfect space. His space felt dimmer now. His light was gone from it. I studied the small discrepancies: the undone tie still on the armchair, the misplaced cologne bottle, the faint unfamiliar scent on his scarf. Women know perfume. Not by brand, by intention. This perfume was sweet, youthful, optimistic in the way a woman becomes when she believes she's special to a man who belongs to someone else. I didn't cry, not even once. Tears are for endings. I wasn't at the ending yet. I was somewhere in the middle where confusion brews into clarity, and clarity brews into resolve. Around noon, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. He had forgotten it, something he never did. A simple notification glowed. "See you tonight?" Sent by someone saved under a name that wasn't real. The contact name was generic. Too generic. Carter and Associates. Business contacts don't send hearts. Business contacts don't text at noon asking about tonight. I didn't unlock the phone. I didn't need to. That single notification was enough to change everything. I stared at the glowing screen until it dimmed again, disappearing like a truth trying to hide. But some truths don't get to hide forever. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. Instead, I took his phone, placed it gently in the drawer by the door, and sat at the dining table in complete silence. Thinking, observing, letting the betrayal settle into bone. I was no longer guessing. Now, I knew. And knowledge is the first weapon of revenge. He ran home at 3 p.m. earlier than usual, panic flashing across his face when he realized his phone wasn't with him. "Clara, have you seen my phone?" he asked, feigning calm. He didn't meet my eyes. I told him I found it on the counter. He exhaled too quickly. Too deeply. The kind of relief a man feels when disaster is narrowly avoided. He didn't ask if I saw anything, which meant he feared the answer. He slid the phone into his pocket like a shield and avoided my gaze for the rest of the afternoon. Guilt doesn't make people distant. Fear does. And he was afraid. Not of losing me, no. He was afraid of being caught before he was ready to face consequences. That evening, he worked late in the office. But he left wearing cologne he didn't use for work. He checked his reflection twice. He straightened his hair in the mirror. Men groom themselves differently for the women they want. For me, he'd comb his hair casually. For her, he styled every strand with care, like attention was currency. When he left, I stood at the window and watched him disappear into the night again. This time, I didn't wonder. This time I knew. And knowing felt like ice forming around my heart, sharp, expanding, unignorable. Instead of breaking down, I made tea. Chamomile, calming, grounding. I sat at the window watching New York pulse with lives overlapping, colliding, tearing apart. Somewhere out there, he was with her. Laughing, touching her hand. Letting her believe she mattered. And I sat in the glow of our apartment, steady and calm, the way a surgeon stays steady before the first incision. Because betrayal doesn't end a marriage. It reveals who you really married. And I had just learned mine was a coward. He returned at 1:03 a.m. His hair was tousled not from the wind. His shirt was wrinkled not from work. He kissed me too quickly. A distraction. A decoy. A tactic. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. As he moved toward the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another notification. Another one not meant for me. You left your tie in my car. He hadn't even taken off his tie before he walked in. His lies were beginning to tangle. And tangled lies always leave threads exposed. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I whispered to myself, keep lying. I need you to. Because the more he lied, the bigger the trap I could build around him. And I wanted him to walk into it willingly. Betrayal rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It comes as a whisper, a shift in breath, a look held too long at a screen, a smile meant for someone else. By the time I reached the third week, suspicion wasn't something I struggled against anymore. It lived with me. It breathed beside me. It warmed the pillow he no longer touched. And yet, I still needed something undeniable. Something that would turn suspicion into certainty, and certainty into resolve. It began on a Thursday. New York was in one of those early spring moods: cold wind, warm sun, too many contradictions to trust. He left early, wearing the same navy suit he always saved for important meetings. But meetings didn't make him shave twice. Meetings didn't make him check his reflection in 3 different surfaces before leaving. He wasn't dressing for success. He was dressing for someone's eyes. My instinct told me to follow him, track him, catch him in the act. But sometimes the wrong instinct leads you to the right truth. Because I didn't follow him. I walked past his desk in our home office and saw the envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, high-quality paper, the kind used for invitations, not bills. I shouldn't have opened it. But betrayal is a language that removes the word should from every sentence. Inside was a confirmation, hotel reservation, Friday night, suite 814, 2 guests. My breath lodged somewhere between my ribs. 2 guests. Not colleagues. Not family. Not a mistake. He was going to spend the night with someone else. Deliberately. Comfortably. Casually. As if loyalty had become optional. And the check-in time? 9:15 p.m. The exact time he usually texted me. Running a bit late. Don't wait up. The truth hit me with surgical precision. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was routine. My husband had been cheating on me. Long enough. To make a schedule of it. I stood there holding the reservation, feeling the weight of a marriage suddenly turned into a fiction. He didn't just betray me. He planned around it. And planning is a far colder kind of infidelity. That evening, he was overly affectionate. Not loving. Strategic. He made dinner. He poured wine. He asked about my day with a softness that didn't belong to him anymore. Cheaters become tender when guilt kisses their edge. It's not love. It's fear of exposure dressed as kindness. I studied him the entire night, the way he avoided my eyes during certain questions. The way he touched my back like he was reminding himself to pretend. The way he smiled without showing his teeth. Fake smiles always hide teeth. Inside me, everything hurt. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Deeply. Like a bruise spreading under the skin. But pain is a currency. And I was learning to spend it wisely. Around 11 p.m., his phone vibrated twice. He turned it face down. I asked, gently, "Work?" He nodded too quickly. Too rehearsed. Then, he made a mistake. He stepped into the hallway to take a call. But he didn't close the door fully. A sliver stayed open. A thread of truth slipped through it. I didn't hear her words. Just her laugh. A laugh I had never heard before. A laugh meant for a man who didn't deserve it. I froze. My heart didn't shatter. It tightened, into a smaller, colder version of itself. He whispered. "Yeah. I can't wait either. Either. Not a business call. Not a colleague. Not an innocent conversation." He was making plans for the hotel suite. He was making promises to someone who shouldn't exist in our marriage. He returned to bed pretending nothing happened. He placed his arm around me. A gesture that used to make me feel safe. But now it felt like a stranger wrapping himself around my ribs. I laid still. Motionless. Cold. Because the woman he spoke to? The one who laughed for him? The one he'd meet in that hotel suite? She wasn't a mistake. She was a habit. A comfort. A choice. My husband chose her. And he chose her again and again in ways that made my 2 years of devotion feel disposable. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because betrayal shouldn't be answered with emotional chaos. No. It should be answered with clarity. With composure. With timing sharp enough to draw blood. And I was learning how to sharpen mine. I didn't sleep that night. I listened to his breathing. The slow, heavy inhale-exhale of a man at peace. How ironic that he slept soundly, while I lay awake in a marriage he'd already burned. But here's the part he didn't understand. Women like me don't break. We transform. And transformation begins in silence. In the morning, while he showered, I opened the reservation again. Suite 814, Friday night. 9:15 p.m. I stared at those numbers. Let them embed themselves into my mind like coordinates for a battlefield. Because this wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a date. A place. A moment waiting for me. If he was going to betray me at 9:15 on Friday in Suite 814, then I would be there too. Not to stop him. Not to beg. But to witness the truth. So I could destroy him with it later. Quietly. Beautifully. Completely. There is a moment after betrayal where your body feels heavier than your bones can hold. Not because the truth hurts, but because the truth finally demands to be lived with. This chapter began on a Monday, and by Sunday night, I was no longer the same woman who had loved him without conditions. I had stepped into a new version of myself. One built from heartbreak, fueled by anger, and sharpened by clarity. The days leading to Friday felt like walking through a decaying dream. He moved around the apartment with a strange lightness. The kind people have when they're in love. But not with me. His smiles became effortless. His eyes distant. His attention fragmented. He wasn't hiding the affair well anymore. Because in his mind, he didn't have to. Men only hide what they're afraid to lose. And he no longer feared losing me. That hurt more than the betrayal. On Tuesday night, he snapped at me over something small. A dish left in the sink. A towel not folded the right way. The kind of annoyance that doesn't belong to household chores, but to guilt trying to find an escape valve. I watched him pace the kitchen, his voice raised, his shoulders tense. He wasn't angry at the dish. He was angry that I existed in the same space as the lie he was trying to maintain. I said nothing, and my silence unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. Sometimes silence is not peace, it's pressure. By Wednesday he guarded his phone like it carried oxygen. Always face down. Always in his pocket. Always close to him. But secrets make noise. Notifications at odd hours. Message previews he tried to swipe away before I could notice. The way he'd smile slightly. Softly. Like someone had said something meant only for him. He thought he was careful. He thought I was clueless. He didn't realize I had already seen the reservation. Already heard the late-night laughter. Already mapped out the coordinates of the betrayal waiting for me on Friday. What he didn't know is that knowledge was no longer the goal. It was preparation. On Thursday morning, he looked at me with a strange expression, like he suspected something. But suspicion is a two-way mirror. He saw the reflection of his guilt, and mistook it for my awareness. I simply asked, "Big plans tomorrow?" He froze. Just for a second. A heartbeat. A blink. But lying hearts always stutter before they speak. Thursday night, he showered again longer than normal. Steam poured from the bathroom, and while he left his shirt on the chair, his phone buzzed 3 times on the nightstand. This time, the door was open wider than before. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. Her voice was clear despite the running water. Laughing. Playful. Familiar with him in a way that made my stomach twist. She said, "I got the dress you like." The dress he liked. Meaning he'd seen her in more than one. Meaning there were dates before Friday. Nights before the hotel. Moments stolen, repeatedly and intimately. Some truths don't break you. They refine you, and refinement is what I felt. In the coldest part of my chest. Later that night, he insisted we go out for dinner. A place we used to love. A place that once held our laughter. But the version of him sitting across the table was not the man I married. He checked his phone under the table. Twice. 3 times. I watched his knee bounce uncontrollably. A sign of excitement mixed with anxiety. He was waiting for her message. Planning their tomorrow, counting the hours until he could be with her. I stirred my drink slowly, listening to the sound of ice clinking against glass. A sound that felt too much like my heart. He looked up briefly. "You're quiet tonight." I smiled gently. "Just tired. It's been a long week." He nodded, relieved. Relieved that I wasn't suspicious. Relieved that I wasn't aware. He didn't realize he was speaking to a woman who was already planning how to dismantle him piece by piece, with nothing more than truth and timing. When the bill came, he rushed to pay. Then checked his phone again. The screen lit up with just one name. No message preview. Just a name. A woman's name. He turned the phone face down so swiftly. I nearly laughed. Tomorrow, I would see the face behind that name. And when I did, the real war would begin. He woke earlier than usual. Not restless this time, but eager. The shower water ran hotter, longer. He used the cologne he reserved for dates. Not with me. While he dressed, he hummed. He never hummed. Not unless he was excited. He had no idea I was awake, watching everything, memorizing every detail of the man who had turned our marriage into a performance. When he kissed my forehead goodbye, I didn't move. His lips felt like a stranger's. He whispered, "Don't wait up tonight." Exactly as I expected. The apartment felt colder once he left. The silence pressed against my skin. I stood in front of the mirror. Looked myself in the eyes. I didn't look broken. I looked awake. Fully awake. I was no longer the woman he took advantage of. No longer the wife waiting at home. I was the witness he never invited. To the scene he thought he'd orchestrated perfectly. I put on a simple black coat, tied my hair back, slipped my phone into my pocket, then grabbed the hotel reservation. Suite 814. 9:15 p.m. Tonight, I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't fight. I would simply watch the truth, as it revealed itself, with devastating clarity. Because some betrayals don't need confrontation. Sometimes all you need is to see the monster fully exposed. Before you begin the slow, quiet work of destroying him. New York never cared about heartbreak. Its streets just kept breathing, roaring, moving, even when I felt the ground tilt under me. That night, the betrayal stopped being a suspicion. It became a body blow, quiet, precise, and devastating in a way only truth can be. It was late past 11. The kind of hour where silence sits differently, thicker, like it's hiding something. Michael had texted that he'd be at the firm late. But his location, it didn't line up. A small humiliating part of me still tried to rationalize. Bad signal, phone glitch, miscommunication. But my instincts? They whispered otherwise. I told myself I wasn't going to check. I wasn't going to break my own dignity by following breadcrumbs like a wounded animal. But betrayal has a sound, a rhythm, a pulse, and it wakes you up long before you see it. I was sorting through some invoices on his home office desk. He'd asked me earlier to send a scanned document to his accountant. That was the only reason my eyes drifted toward the corner of his monitor. A notification blinked, faint but visible. A name I'd seen before. Lena. At first glance, it looked like a work subject line. But the preview, last night, still lingers on my skin. I can't wait for the next time. My throat closed. Everything in me tried to shut down, to scatter the pieces before I fully read them. But I clicked, and the world as I knew it cracked open. 2 photos. One of his hand on a woman's bare back, her face turned away, but unmistakably familiar in silhouette. The second, him kissing her shoulder while she wore the necklace he bought me for our anniversary. That was when something inside me quietly broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, cold fracture. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even breathe for a few seconds. It was the stillness right before a storm decides where to land. Something else was attached. A short clip. I didn't play it fully, not then. Just enough to see her laugh, leaning into him, both of them tangled in sheets that weren't ours. The worst part? His voice. Warm, soft. The exact tone he used to calm me during my panic attacks. The tone that once made me feel safe. The irony wasn't lost on me. Scrolling hurt more than any slap could. There were months of hidden rendezvous, inside jokes, plans, hotel bookings, photos, deleted messages she thought he kept hidden. But he didn't hide them well enough from me. And then, there was the message that killed the last bit of innocence I'd been clinging to. Don't worry. She won't ever suspect. Clara trusts me too much. And she's too soft to leave. Soft, too soft. It echoed like a verdict. Not on me but on him. I closed the laptop gently, almost tenderly, because the moment I read those words, my heartbreak didn't turn into rage. Not yet. It turned into clarity. Cold, calculating clarity. Just over an hour later, I heard the elevator. The soft click of the key. The familiar shuffle of his shoes. And when he walked through the door, he carried himself with the relaxed looseness of a man who believed he was winning at something. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, told me he was exhausted. I studied him with a new pair of eyes. Eyes that finally saw. The way he avoided holding my gaze too long. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar. The slight flush on his skin. He didn't notice my silence. Because men like him never do until it's far too late. I didn't confront him. Not that night. Not with screaming or accusations. Because the moment you reveal you know the truth, you lose the advantage. And I wasn't losing anything else to him. Ever again. Later, he fell asleep quickly, too quickly. As if his conscience was light. I sat on the edge of the bed, the city glowing beneath the window, and zoomed in on the photo again. The necklace. My necklace. The final insult. That was when something inside me didn't break. It hardened. And for the first time in months, I felt steady, focused. Not because the pain had eased, but because I finally understood the game. And he had no idea I'd learned the rules. By sunrise, I already had 3 plans forming in my mind, 3 paths, 3 possible endings. Only one of them would leave him wondering how everything slipped from his grasp so quietly. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he thought was too soft to leave wasn't planning to leave at all. I was planning to win. The human heart has an odd way of breaking. It doesn't shatter in one flawless crack. It dissolves slow, grain by grain, until you look down and realize you're standing in the ruins of something you once protected with your entire chest. That morning was the first time I felt the weight of what I'd discovered. Not in anger, not even in sadness, but in the suffocating quiet that settles after truth detonates. I barely slept. My eyes closed, my body stilled, but my mind was awake the entire night. When dawn crept through the curtains, painting the bedroom in muted gold, I stared at the ceiling and counted each breath like it was the only thing tethering me to myself. Michael slept beside me, peacefully, obliviously, his breathing steady, even rhythmic. I wondered for a moment, how many mornings had he woken like this after leaving someone else's bed? How many times had I greeted his lies with tenderness? The realization hollowed me out. I went to the bathroom, locking the door behind me though he was still asleep. The mirror didn't recognize me. Or maybe I didn't recognize her. My eyes were swollen, but not from tears. Because I hadn't cried. Not once. My silence scared me more than any sob would have. I pressed my palm against the cold marble sink and whispered to my reflection, "Don't break." Not yet. Because breaking now meant giving him something he didn't deserve. the privilege of witnessing my pain. On the counter sat the necklace he bought me, a delicate gold chain with a single pendant, the same one she had worn in those photos. I lifted it, felt its weight, studied its shine, and in that moment, something inside me clenched. It wasn't the jewelry that hurt. It was the audacity. The way he recycled affection like it was nothing more than a prop, a performance, a routine he didn't bother customizing. I set it down gently. Not because I cared for it, but because I wanted him to see it untouched. Perfect. As if it meant something to me. The irony would matter later. He called out from the bedroom, half asleep, asking if I'd seen his watch. His voice, the same voice that whispered promises, apologies, and future plans, hit me like a cold slap. Because now, every word from him sounded like a lie. I answered casually, controlled, steady. I pointed him to the dresser without looking at him. He didn't notice. He kissed my cheek, thanked me, and went to shower. When he closed the door, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the water running. Have you ever listened to the person who broke you performing their morning routine as if nothing in the world has changed? It's a strange kind of torment, almost surreal. I looked at the man's silhouette behind the frosted glass and thought, he betrayed me, he lied to me, he humiliated me. And yet, I was the one being quiet, composed, still. That was the moment I realized the fallout wasn't emotional, it was strategic. My heart was hurt, yes, but it wasn't numb in defeat. It was numb in calculation. While he showered, I opened the laptop again, not to read more, but to begin documenting. Dates, times, locations, screenshots, patterns, evidence. I wasn't thinking about leaving him. Not at all. Leaving would be too easy, too expected, too clean. No. I wanted him to feel the consequences. Quietly, deeply, irrevocably. Not through violence or chaos, but through the collapse of everything he believed he controlled. I created a new folder, named it something simple. Truth. Because that's what would eventually dismantle him. After he left for work, unaware of the storm forming right behind him, I made a phone call. I called the one person whose silence was more powerful than comfort. A private investigator I knew through a former client. We didn't talk long, just enough for him to understand that I wanted facts, patterns, and absolute discretion. When I ended the call, I didn't shake, didn't crumble, didn't panic. I felt grounded, like the emotional earthquake had finally settled. At noon, he texted me, "Lunch today? Missing you." It was almost poetic how lies make themselves sound tender. I stared at the message for a long moment, let the irony seep into me like cold air. Then I wrote back, "Sure. Midtown? Same place?" Because nothing disrupts a liar more than consistency, predictability, normalcy, the calm before the betrayal they never see coming. And when we met, I studied everything. His smile, his posture, his excuses about stress, his half-hearted compliments, his distracted glances at his phone. The fallout wasn't destroying me. It was stripping him bare. By evening, I realized something unexpected. The heartbreak had begun to fade. Not because I forgave him, but because I was beginning to detach. Emotionally, quietly, strategically. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it made it useful. Every ache turned into a sharpened thought. Every memory twisted into fuel. I was no longer the Clara he thought he could deceive. He had killed that version of me the moment he touched someone else and whispered my name to her like a shield. What rose in her place wasn't anger. Not yet. It was purpose. That night, as I pretended to sleep beside him, he whispered, "I love you," into the dark. And for the first time since I met him, I felt absolutely nothing. Not warmth. Not hate. Not fear. Just a question. How do you dismantle a man who thinks you're still his? The answer was already forming. Quiet, precise, unavoidable. Revenge doesn't begin with rage. It begins with silence. The kind that shivers just beneath the skin, quiet, patient, waiting for its moment to bloom. And in the days that followed Michael's betrayal, that silence became my closest companion. I didn't explode. I didn't confront. I didn't crumble. I observed. And in my observation, I began to unravel secrets he never imagined I'd discover. Revenge wasn't a lightning bolt, it was a seed. One that needed stillness to sprout. By the time dawn came again, I had traced back nearly 6 months of the inconsistencies in his schedule. The receipts. The spontaneous work emergencies. The sudden gym nights despite never breaking a sweat when he got home. All the pieces fit too neatly now. But this wasn't just about catching him cheating. Cheating was the symptom. The real disease was entitlement. He believed he owned my trust, my devotion, my loyalty. But devotion becomes deadly when it's misused. Each night after he fell asleep, I opened the folder named Truth. It filled quickly. Screenshots, bank logs, rideshare receipts, hotel confirmations, social media patterns, location pings forwarded from my PI. Every detail felt like a stitch being undone from the life I thought I was living. Yet every discovery made me colder, sharper, more certain. He didn't just betray me, he underestimated me. And that was a mistake I would make catastrophic for him. On the third evening, the PI called. Not texted, called. Which meant the information was heavy. I stepped into the hallway. The one where Michael once kissed me against the wall after a winter gala, his breath warm on my ear. Funny how nostalgia loses flavor when truth spoils it. The PI's voice was calm, professional, almost detached. Clara, you need to see this in person. My stomach tightened, not in fear, but in anticipation. That's when I knew, the simple cheating wasn't the whole story. There was something deeper, something I hadn't even thought to suspect. We met at a small cafe near his office. I wore a dark coat, hair tied back, no makeup. Not because I was hiding, because I was becoming someone he'd never really known. The PI slid a file across the table. Before you open it, he murmured. Just breathe. I nodded. Though my breathing was already calm, almost too calm. Inside the file were photos. Not just of Michael and Lena, but Michael with someone else. A man. Sitting too close. Hands brushing, drinks shared. Money exchanged, patterns. Meetings at strange hours. Transfers to offshore accounts. And then, a document with a signature. Michael's. On a lease for an apartment I'd never heard of. Under a shell company. Connected directly to Lena. But the man? He wasn't just a friend. He was her cousin, a known financial strategist with a reputation for quiet, profitable corruption. The kind that ruins entire companies behind closed doors. The PI leaned in, voice lowered. Your husband isn't just cheating. He's laundering money through her connections. And they're using his firm's clients to do it. The world slowed, blurred. Not from shock, but from clarity. Michael wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was dragging my name, my reputation, my future into something that could destroy me by association. He wasn't a careless liar. He was a liability. And that changed everything. My revenge could no longer be emotional. It had to be legal, strategic, devastating. I started asking questions, quietly, precisely. How long? With whom? What documents linked to me? Which accounts were vulnerable? The PI looked impressed. Almost wary. Most people cry at this stage, he said. I didn't. I only whispered. Show me everything. Because now, my mission wasn't just exposing his betrayal. It was survival. And survival, when sharpened by betrayal, becomes lethal. That night, when Michael fell asleep after another pretend exhausting day, I walked into his home office and opened his drawers with calm precision. I knew what to look for now. And in the back of the second drawer, I found it. A flash drive. Black, unmarked. Hidden beneath old insurance papers. I plugged it into my laptop. Hundreds of files. Contracts. Payment logs. Emails. Encrypted folders. But one folder wasn't encrypted. Its title froze me. Exit plan. Inside was a document outlining financial redistribution. Secret accounts. Personal assets being moved. Divorce preparation. And a timeline. He planned to leave me. Not weeks from now. Not months. He planned to leave me next week. But only after transferring our shared investments into a private account under his name. He was going to discard me the way he discarded truth. Use me, drain me, abandon me. And the necklace he gave the other woman? Just a symbol of how replaceable I was in his eyes. My heartbreak evaporated. Not softened. Evaporated. Because now I understood the full picture. His betrayal wasn't romantic. It wasn't personal. It was calculated. Which meant my revenge needed to be too. I closed the flash drive, placed everything back perfectly. and walked out of his office with a new identity forming inside me. Not Clara, the trusting wife, but Clara, the strategist. By the time I slipped back into bed, Michael pulled me closer in his sleep, draping an arm around me as if I belonged there. He had no idea that while he held me, I held his future in my hands, and I was about to reshape it, piece by painful piece. Before sunrise, I drafted the first step of my revenge, not against his heart, but against every lie he built his life on. And what I found on that flash drive, it wasn't even the darkest secret he was hiding. Every revenge begins with a single move, quiet, almost invisible, a shift so subtle that the person you're targeting never notices the ground shifting beneath their feet. By the time Michael's world began to tilt, he still believed he was standing on solid ground. He had no idea the foundation was already cracking. The morning after discovering the flash drive, I behaved with impossible normalcy. I made breakfast, asked about his day, listened to his hollow stories, lies wrapped in routine. Meanwhile, in my mind, pieces were aligning. My first move wasn't theatrical. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was the opposite. I began fading, not by leaving, but by withdrawing strategically. Shorter replies. Longer silences. Calm, unreadable expressions. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger suspicion, just enough to disrupt his rhythm. Because a cheating man relies on predictability. He thrives on knowing exactly how you'll react. When you stop reacting, he loses control. And when a man loses control, he makes mistakes. Mistakes I was waiting for. The first real action happened in 7 minutes. 7 minutes while water ran behind the bathroom door. 7 minutes he believed I was choosing earrings in the bedroom mirror. Instead, I opened the safe drawer beneath his desk. I removed the documents with my name on them. My birth certificate copies, my passport, my banking authorizations, the deed to the tiny piece of land my grandmother left me. Not much, but everything that could be used against me. I replaced them with perfect replicas printed by a friend in legal services who owed me a favor. Fake but convincing. If he checked, he'd see nothing unusual. The originals? I stored them in a lockbox at a bank branch across town. Under a new key, under a new deposit account, under a new identity he didn't know existed. 7 minutes, and he would never know what vanished. Later that afternoon, I visited the firm where we jointly invested in a real estate project that had grown significantly in value. Michael always assumed I didn't understand the legal side. He assumed my signature on those contracts was naive loyalty. It wasn't. I had made certain, years ago, that I held partial autonomy in emergency decisions. So I executed one, quietly. I put a temporary freeze on my share of the investment. Legal, clean, within my rights. It meant Michael couldn't move or transfer the money without my consent. The same money he planned to siphon offshore next week. His exit plan timeline evaporated in an instant. He would receive a notification of the freeze at midnight. I could almost picture his face when he read it. Confusion, then irritation, then unease. The first crack. That evening, I met the PI again, this time in a quiet corner of Riverside Park where the lamps flickered just enough to feel cinematic. He handed me another envelope. His expression tightened with something that looked dangerously close to pity. Clara, it's worse. Inside were photos taken the night before. Photos of Michael meeting Lena at a bar, kissing her, holding her, unsurprising at this point. But then, a second batch. Michael handing a thick envelope to the same man from earlier, her cousin. Then shaking hands with another stranger. The PI leaned closer. The new man is under investigation. Fraud. Embezzlement. Cyber extortion. If your husband is connected to him, even indirectly, it's a federal offense. A chill slid down my spine. Slow and deliberate. Not fear. Forewarning. Michael wasn't preparing to leave me because he was done with me. He was preparing to leave me because he needed someone to take the fall. And I had been his perfect alibi. His perfect distraction. His perfect scapegoat. Until now. I returned home earlier than usual. He was in the living room, pretending to work, glasses on, posture relaxed. He glanced up, surprised. Hey, you're home early. I smiled softly. Traffic was light. He didn't realize the irony. I had arrived early on purpose. To watch him. Study him. Time him. He kissed my forehead casually, then went back to his laptop. But something was off. He was nervous, distracted, checking his phone too often. Good. Half an hour later, he told me he needed to pick up some files from the office. A lie. I knew it. He knew it, but I smiled and nodded anyway. The moment the door closed, I opened his laptop. The password was easy. He never believed I'd look. His email was open. A draft sat half-typed. A message to Lena. The assets are frozen. Something's wrong. Did you say anything? We need to move faster. Faster. Because he was losing control. I closed the laptop, wiped my fingerprints, and exhaled. Not from panic. From satisfaction. This was the moment. The turning point. The pivot where the prey becomes the hunter. While his laptop processed updates, I found his phone on the counter. Unlocked. A rare mistake. My pulse didn't jump. I didn't hesitate. I forwarded 3 of his incriminating messages to a secure cloud folder linked only to me. Then, carefully, I typed a message to Lena in his style. Don't contact me for a few days. She's getting suspicious. Wait for instructions. Not to create chaos, to slow her down. To isolate him. To fracture their coordination. His world wasn't collapsing yet, but its foundation was eroding. And he still had no idea. When he came home, he looked tense. Something had shifted in him. He studied me longer. Asked more questions. Watched my expressions with unnecessary attention. He sensed something. But he couldn't identify it. A predator feels when the forest has changed. But not always why. I kept my tone light. My movements soft. My presence easy. Not because I felt any of those things. But because the most dangerous trap is the one that feels safe. He kissed me goodnight. I let him. My mind was elsewhere. On the next move. The larger move. The one that would break his strategy in half. As he slept, I opened the flash drive again, searching deeper than the night before. And in one hidden folder, buried beneath layers of encryption, I found something I shouldn't have been able to access. Something he never thought I'd see. Something that changed the direction of my revenge entirely. I stared at the screen in silence, my pulse slowing to a cold rhythm. Tomorrow, everything would escalate. I stepped deeper into the cold months of New York with my mind sharper, quieter, and far more dangerous than anyone around me imagined. Soft exhale. This was the part of revenge no one warns you about: the patience before the storm. The testing of boundaries. The subtle observations that reveal who your enemy truly is beneath their curated smiles. The night I uncovered Eric's 2-year betrayal and Savannah's involvement, I didn't erupt. I didn't scream. I didn't even whisper his name. I simply listened, observed, calculated. And now it was time to escalate. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with surgical precision. Because the first rule of quiet revenge is simple. Let them think they're still winning. I started with Savannah. She had always underestimated me, assuming my silence meant softness, assuming my composure meant fragility. People like her never understood that silence is often a blade, thin, sharp, and easily overlooked until it's already pressed against their throat. So, I staged a conversation in the kitchen one morning. The timing was intentional, 7:14 a.m. The exact minute Michael always left for work but pretended not to watch me from the hallway mirror. I placed my phone on the counter, screen up, deliberately unlocked. A fabricated text thread displayed a single, enticing line. Meeting confirmed. Client wants discretion. Transfer expected Friday. I stepped into the living room, acting unaware. 2 minutes later, the screen dimmed. 3 minutes later, the angle of the phone had changed. 4 minutes later, Lena texted Michael. Good. She took the bait faster than I anticipated. And yet, that wasn't the real test. I wanted to know how fast Michael would act, how quickly they communicated, who initiated, who strategized, who panicked. He failed spectacularly. Within 15 minutes, I got a notification. Unknown number. We should talk. Is something going on? He couldn't help himself. His guilt vibrated through every syllable. I didn't respond. Silence, again, was the weapon. And my silence made him spiral. To escalate effectively, I needed to identify every single person who had known about their affair or benefited from it. I started attending social gatherings again. Not with my old warmth, not with enthusiasm. More like someone exploring a new territory disguised as familiar land. I watched faces, movements. Those fleeting, uncomfortable glances that people accidentally exchange when they're hiding something. Two people began standing out. Melissa, his overly cheerful coworker who always complimented Lena's outfits a little too loudly. Evan, his business partner whose hand lingered on my shoulder not out of comfort, but guilt. They weren't just bystanders. They were enablers. And enablers often have the loosest lips when pressure is applied gently. So I tested them too. With Melissa, it was a simple line over champagne. I sometimes wonder what people hide behind all this glitter and chatter. Her eyes widened. Her hand shook. She excused herself seconds later. With Evan, I leaned in slightly during a dinner. You ever feel like someone's lying to you, Evan? I mean, truly lying? He nearly dropped his fork. I said nothing else. Let them marinate in the ambiguity. Let them wonder how much I knew. Because fear, even unspoken, is leverage. And then came the most important test of all, the one the entire next stage of my revenge depended on. I observed him for 3 days. Didn't confront. Didn't ask questions. Didn't accuse. Instead, I analyzed. He became restless. Checking his phone compulsively. Leaving the room whenever I entered. Waking up in the night to pace in the living room. Whispering urgently into his phone thinking I couldn't hear. But I always heard. By the 4th night, he could no longer hold himself together. He approached me with that calculated gentleness manipulators always use when they want information. There's something different about you lately, he murmured. A statement. Not a question. I looked up at him with practiced confusion. My tone soft and airy. Is there? He studied me for too long. Waiting. Hoping I'd slip. But I didn't. And that terrified him. Because for the first time since he met me, he had no idea what I was thinking. The real turning point didn't come from the tests themselves. It came the next morning, when I slipped out early, deliberately leaving the apartment silent and empty, and returned unexpectedly. Mikhail wasn't alone. He stood in the hallway with Lena. Not touching. Not speaking. But too close. Too familiar. And when they realized I was there, Savannah paled. Lena froze. I simply smiled gently, stepping past them with an unreadable calm. And that broke them, because nothing is more horrifying to a guilty person than a woman who should be screaming, but isn't. Nothing is more destabilizing than kindness where there should be rage. Nothing is more threatening than calm where they expected chaos. They exchanged a look, fearful, fragile. And that was when I knew. It ended with revelation. Because 2 hours later, after Michael left in a hurry and Savannah stopped replying to him, I received an anonymous email with a single line. You're not the only one he lied to. Attached was a document, one that would shift everything I thought I knew. There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than truth, when a single ping from an email can fracture the thin balance you've held together with both hands. That morning, the anonymous message didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a warning, or a gift. A quiet nudge from fate, guiding me toward a truth I didn't know I needed. The subject line was blank. The sender was hidden. The body contained 8 words. You're not the only one he lied to. And attached a folder, password protected. Encrypted. Someone had gone through an extraordinary effort to make sure only I could open it. At first, I hesitated. Opening anything anonymous is a risk. But betrayal has already infected your life. The fear of one more wound becomes strangely irrelevant. So I typed the only password that made sense. The one word he swore was ours alone. Vermont. The place he proposed. The lie he built our life on. The memory that now felt rotten. The file unlocked instantly, and what I saw inside wasn't a document. It was a folder of documents. 37 to be exact. Financial records. Emails. Screenshots. Voice memos. An exported text thread with someone I'd never seen. Lena. At first glance, it looked like an affair. Another one. But it wasn't. It was worse. Buried in the files were financial transfers, large ones dating back 17 months. Some made in cash. Some through business accounts. Some from my accounts. My breath left my body. He had used my identity. My signature. My access. Not just to fund hotel rooms or meals with Lena, but to funnel money through shell accounts with names like North Star Consulting, Luna Holdings, Vermont Strategies. All fake. All built by him. All connected to his work. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had used me as a tool in something criminal. And he thought I would never notice. But that wasn't the worst part. The text thread between him and Lena was long, chaotic, and painfully revealing. She wasn't a lover. She wasn't a friend. She was a threat. Someone he'd been stringing along with promises to leave me, promises to pay her back, promises of a future he never intended to build. Her last message from 3 weeks ago hit like a blow. If you don't return the money, I will go to your wife. So he had stolen from her too. Manipulated her. Used her. Just like he used me. Just like he used Savannah. And then, the voice memo. I clicked play. Mikkel's voice filled the room, cold, calculated, unapologetic. Clara won't suspect anything. She trusts me. Lena's too naive to question it. And Lena? She's desperate. I can manage her. This all ends once the deal goes through. After that, I'll be free. Free. He wanted to be free, of all of us. He didn't see me as a person. Or a partner. Or a wife. Just a resource. A stepping stone. An obstacle to be removed when convenient. I didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't break. I just listened. At the bottom of the folder was a PDF titled Exit Strategy. I opened it. Inside were plans detailing how he would move. To Boston. Alone. After liquidating the accounts he'd built with my identity. He planned to leave suddenly, probably within weeks. He planned to take everything with him. He planned to vanish. And then one final line. Clara won't fight. She's too gentle. She'll accept it. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not heartbreak. A deep, lethal stillness. He had mistaken gentleness for weakness. Compassion for compliance. Silence for surrender. That misunderstanding would cost him everything. As I scrolled through the final pieces, I found a clue buried in metadata. The anonymous sender wasn't a stranger. It was someone inside his business. Someone who knew everything Michael had done. Someone who wanted me to know too. Someone who didn't care if exposing him burned the entire operation down. Someone who signed their digital fingerprint with a hidden tag. A.K. Not everyone is blind. Ek. His initials. His signature. His inside circle. Someone close enough to betray him. But not close enough to trust him. Michael wasn't the only one playing a game in the dark. I sat back in my chair, the city outside moving like a distant dream, sirens blending with the heartbeat in my ears. For the first time in months, everything aligned. The betrayal, the timing, the emotional cracks forming in their little secret alliance. And now, I knew enough to destroy him. Emotionally. Financially. Socially. Legally, absolutely. But I didn't act yet. Revenge isn't a reaction. It's choreography. And now I finally had the music. That evening, Michael came home early. His keys trembled in the lock. His breathing was shallow. His eyes kept darting around the room like he sensed something was wrong. He approached me slowly, carefully. Clara, he said, voice thin, can we talk? I looked up at him with the calmest smile I've ever worn. Of course, I whispered. But inside, I already knew. Tomorrow, everything would shift. When he asked, can we talk? I nodded with practiced softness. I let him speak. Not with words, those didn't matter, but with the tremble in his fingers, the darting of his gaze, the way his jaw tightened every time my eyes lingered on him. He was unraveling. And unraveling men confess with their behavior long before they confess with their mouths. He paced the living room, pretending to tidy clutter that didn't exist. He opened his mouth twice, closed it, swallowed, waiting for me to reveal something. Waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. Instead, I excused myself early and went to bed. A gentle kiss on his cheek, one that didn't belong to a devoted wife anymore, but a strategist masking her checkmate. He barely slept. I heard the couch creak every time he shifted. Every whispered phone call. Every anxious sigh. And I lay awake thinking, tomorrow, I stop observing. Tomorrow, I act. My plan began at dawn. I arrived at the office of a forensic accountant recommended quietly by a contact I shouldn't have technically known. A man whose sister went through something similar. A man who owed me a quiet favor. He reviewed the encrypted files within hours. When he looked up, his expression wasn't sympathy. It was disbelief. Clara, these records indicate federal-level financial fraud. Identity misuse. Embezzlement. Potential tax evasion. If the government sees this, they will. But not yet. I had him document everything. Every signature Michael had forged. Every transfer. Every falsified record. Then I made copies digital and physical and secured them in 3 separate places. A private safety deposit box in Midtown, an encrypted cloud drive under a new alias, and the hands of someone who would soon play an important role. With that done, the first stage of execution began. Revenge on Michael alone was too small. His betrayal had tentacles, and Lena had wrapped herself around several of them willingly or naively. I still hadn't decided. So I gave her a choice. A quiet one. At 4:37 p.m., I entered the cafe she always visited before her evening classes. I didn't sit with her. I watched from across the room, letting her feel my presence before she found me. She froze. Her cup nearly slipped from her hand. I walked over slowly, placing a sealed envelope in front of her. Her lip trembled, but she forced composure. Inside the envelope was one printed email thread between her and Michael, one I had never confronted her about, and a note in my handwriting. You have one chance to step out of the fire. Choose wisely. I didn't stay to see her reaction. Power isn't in delivering the blow, it's in letting it land without explaining it. By the time I left the cafe, she was already messaging someone frantically. Presumably Michael. Perfect. Let them scramble. Evan, the man whose guilt had been leaking from his pores for weeks, became my leverage point. I asked to meet him for coffee. He agreed instantly. Probably expecting tears or confusion, maybe even forgiveness. What he got instead was a calm, calculated woman who placed a folder on the table between them. You already know what's inside, I said quietly. He paled. I didn't threaten him. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't accuse. I simply asked a single question. Do you want to go down with him? People talk about loyalty, but fear is stronger. He asked me what I wanted. I smiled. I need information. And just like that, Evan broke. He told me everything. The upcoming deal. The investors who were already suspicious. The private messages where Eric bragged about outsmarting everyone. The timeline of his planned departure. And then the most damning detail. Michael's exit funds weren't fully secure yet. He needed one last transaction. One that would require my signature. Again. Perfect. Timing is everything in revenge. And fate had handed me the final puzzle piece. I contacted her from a private number. She answered on the second ring. A hesitant breath. A soft, broken, hello? I didn't introduce myself. Didn't comfort her. I simply said, you were right. He lied to you too. Silence. Then, quietly, almost fragile, she whispered, is he hurting you like he hurt me? I didn't answer that question. Instead, I asked her to meet me, and when she arrived, eyes swollen, shoulders tense, I handed her something she never expected. Proof. Everything he took from her. Every promise he made. Every dollar missing from her accounts. Her tears weren't surprising, but her words were. I want to help you destroy him. And that's when I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. When Eric came home, he found me sitting on the couch, sipping tea, illuminated only by a single lamp. Calm, still, waiting. He hesitated in the doorway. Clara, we need to talk. I nodded. Then sit. He sat across from me, hands clasped too tightly, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. I feel like something's wrong, he started. I let him speak. He rambled about stress at work. He blamed long hours. He blamed misunderstandings. He even blamed Savannah's emotional instability. He said everything. Except the truth. And then I leaned forward, meeting his eyes with the softness that had always disarmed him. Michael, I whispered. You should be very careful about lying tonight. His face drained of color. He swallowed. Why do you say that? Because, I thought, tonight is your final chance to tell the truth before your world begins to collapse. But all I said aloud was, because I already know. He froze. His chest stopped rising. His fingers twitched. His lips parted. He looked like a man watching his own life detach from his body. That moment, the exact second he realized his mask had fallen, was the true turning point. The moment my revenge stepped out of the shadows and into the room with us. He opened his mouth, whispering the beginning of a confession he never intended to give. Clara, I can explain. But before he could say another word, my phone lit up with a message from Lena. A message with 4 words. It's time. He's exposed. There's a moment in every revenge story where the planning stops, and the execution begins. Mine arrived quietly, no dramatic music, no sharp intake of breath, just a steady realization that the time for gathering pieces was over. Now, I would start moving them. And the first movement? A perfectly placed crack in Michael's false reality. I woke up earlier than usual. Not with anxiety. Not with heartbreak. With intention. I stood at the bedroom window, the gray New York dawn stretching across the skyline, painting everything in a calm, muted light. Michael walked in, half awake, rubbing his temples the way he did when guilt pressed behind his eyes. He paused when he saw me. Not because I looked angry. I didn't. But because I looked different. Silent. Focused. Unmoved. He opened his mouth to ask something, maybe, "Are you okay? Or is something wrong?" But I didn't give him the chance. I walked past him with a soft, chilled whisper. "I have a full day. Nothing more." And the look on his face, confusion, fear, suspicion all tangled together, was the first sign that control had shifted. He just didn't know how much yet. At 9 a.m., I met with someone who would shape the entire momentum of my revenge. A compliance investigator from his firm. Someone who had already sensed inconsistencies. Someone who already didn't trust him. Someone who had been quietly waiting for one push, not knowing I had an entire avalanche ready. I didn't accuse Michael. I didn't volunteer everything. I simply asked subtle questions. Is it normal for associates to move funds between client accounts without documentation? Have there been concerns about audit trails lately? I'm worried something might be wrong with the firm's internal controls. That was all it took. Her eyes sharpened. Her pen began to move. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We've been looking at some patterns," she confessed. Exactly what I hoped for. Because now, they weren't following my lead. They believed they were following their own. The investigation had quietly clicked forward. At 11:12 a.m., I initiated the part he'd never recover from. I contacted 3 people Michael relied on more than anyone. His senior partner, his project manager, and his favorite client, the one whose trust he bragged about like a trophy. But I didn't accuse him of cheating. I didn't mention Lena. I didn't touch the emotional betrayal. I focused on the one thing that terrifies men like him: professional instability. I scheduled quick check-ins. I asked casual, well-crafted questions about unexpected discrepancies. I implied gently, subtly, that Michael might be overwhelmed. Humans fill silence with their worst fears. And that day, they filled that silence with the possibility that Michael had made a critical mistake. By the time the calls ended, 3 people who trusted him implicitly were suddenly watching him, waiting, doubting. A seed of suspicion is a living thing. And I had just planted a forest. At 1:24 p.m., I delivered the most surgical move of the day. I submitted a legally notarized request to freeze all joint accounts temporarily, citing unverified transactions that required review. The bank handled it professionally, discreetly, and immediately. The accounts weren't closed. They weren't flagged publicly. Just paused. Quietly. Enough to disrupt anything he'd been planning. Enough to force him into panic mode. Especially because I knew he needed those funds imminently. I walked out of the bank feeling a calm I hadn't felt in months. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Surgical. Beautiful. When I returned early that evening, Michael was already home. He was pacing. His phone ringing. His movements restless, agitated, sharp-edged. He didn't even hear me walk in. He was too busy whispering into his phone. "No. I didn't authorize anything, just look again. There must be a processing error. Why would I freeze my own account?" I stood in the doorway, watching the panic bloom across his features. He still didn't look at me. He was too busy trying to save a life he didn't know was already buried. When he finally noticed me, his voice cracked. "Clara, something's wrong with the accounts. Did you do anything today?" His expression was a mixture of worry and suspicion and something almost like fear. I tilted my head, studying him with calm curiosity. "Why?" I asked softly. "What's the matter?" Lied. Sputtered. There's a small issue. It's nothing. I can fix it." That was his problem. He always thought he could fix everything. But not this. At 7:03 p.m., the exact moment he thought the day couldn't get worse, he reached for his email. He froze. Because the system wouldn't let him log in. Password locked due to internal audit. He tried again. And again. Failure. 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 He looked up at me slowly, like he was trying to solve an equation that suddenly didn't have an answer. Clara. Did you talk to anyone today? I looked at him with a softness so controlled it could have been mistaken for compassion. I talked to a few people, I whispered. But I suppose you'll find out which ones soon. He blinked. Once. Twice. And in that moment, I watched him understand. Not the details. Not the scope. Not the extent. But the truth. Everything in his carefully constructed life was beginning to slip through his fingers. And I was the one holding the threads. He took a step toward me, voice trembling. Clara. What are you doing? I didn't answer. Because his phone suddenly buzzed. A message popped up, from an unknown number. One sentence. The audit has begun. He went still, white, airless. And I turned away, leaving him to drown in the silence. The fallout didn't arrive as a whisper. It crashed into my life like a falling beam, loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. The morning after the confrontation at the boardroom, news traveled faster than I could inhale. I hadn't even finished tying my shoes when my phone began vibrating nonstop. First one call. Then another, then 10 more. All from people who normally avoided early morning contact as if it were a contagious disease. I answered the first call. It was Lena. Her voice trembled with excitement and fear at the same time. Did you see the headlines yet? Your expose leaked. My pulse hammered. What? It's everywhere. Someone published the internal emails you pulled from Michael's laptop, the ones showing he funneled company money into those offshore accounts. And the message he sent to your stepmother? The one where he called you expendable? She paused. It's all public. A cold heaviness settled in my chest. I hadn't released anything. Not yet. My plan had been controlled, precise time to hit only when the rest of the pieces were ready. This wasn't my move. Someone else just escalated the war. Before I could answer, another call came through. Then another. Then a text. You need to come to the office. Now. Caleb. I drove with my jaw locked so tight it hurt. By the time I reached the company building, a crowd had gathered outside, employees, reporters, investors, everyone with a phone out, everyone buzzing with the same frantic energy. Caleb met me at the entrance, his face flushed. They're blaming you, he said. And Michael is saying you hacked him. A beat of stunned silence lodged in my throat. He's what? He walked into the crisis meeting white as paper, shaking, swearing you sabotaged him and released classified files to ruin the company. For a moment, the sound around me faded. The shouting reporters, the clicking cameras, the internal alarms blaring as security tried to keep order. None of it existed. There was only that one sentence. The one accusation that could destroy me far faster than I could destroy him. I felt my stomach drop. This was the consequence. By exposing him even privately, I'd nudged the war into motion. And instead of retreating, he'd done what cornered predators always do. Strike wildly, desperately, without care for who else got hit. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. The board wants to see you. Some members think you're the whistleblower hero who saved us. Others think you wrecked our stock price overnight. He hesitated. And then there's Robert. He's in there spinning a story that makes you look like the villain of the century. This was bigger than anything so far. Bigger than the arguments, the secret files, the plans I'd laid brick by brick. This was my reputation, my career, my entire future at stake because someone released my evidence too soon and turned my play into a dramatic explosion. I looked through the glass doors toward the conference room hallway. I could see silhouettes inside. One of them was Michael, pacing, gesturing, working the room with feverish intensity. He knew what he was doing. If he took me down first, the truth wouldn't matter. You ready for this? Caleb asked. No, I said honestly. Then I pushed my shoulders back. But it doesn't matter. I walked forward, each step heavier than the last. Because this wasn't just a consequence. This was the beginning of a firestorm. And someone, either my enemy or my hidden ally, had just lit the match. The conference room smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and the faint perfume of desperation. I stepped inside slowly, letting the soft click of my heels announce my presence, not loud enough to intimidate but just enough to mark the territory. Michael froze mid-gesture, mid-sentence, like a puppet whose strings had been snipped. You're here, he said, voice tight. Not a question. A statement. His eyes darted to the side, checking for support, allies, someone who might intervene. There was no one. Only me. And the weight of everything he had done, compressed into one silent, controlled figure. I didn't speak immediately. I let him talk. He rambled about numbers, losses, leaks, blaming everything on unexpected errors and a malfunctioning system. He tried to maintain composure, but the cracks were obvious: trembling hands, shallow breaths, darting eyes. I need to know why, I said finally. Why all of it? Why me? Why them? Why the lies? Then, almost too quietly, he said, you were too trusting. Too quiet. Too easy to manipulate. Every word he spoke only confirmed what I already knew. He had never respected me. Never loved me. Never even feared me. Until now. I took a seat across from him, leaning slightly forward. Eyes locked. Silence stretched like a taut wire. And then it came, the first crack of panic. His hands shook visibly as he reached for a pen and fumbled. His voice broke when he tried to defend himself. I didn't think she, Lena. No, I meant it differently. I raised a hand, calm but firm. Stop. Just stop. No interruptions. No excuses. The more he spoke, the smaller he became. By the time I leaned back, the confident, untouchable man I married or thought I did was gone. In his place, a frazzled, cornered creature trying to bargain with a predator he hadn't recognized yet. But the predator in this room wasn't him. I stood, closing the gap between us. This isn't about money, I said softly, almost cruelly. This isn't about proof, evidence, or even exposure. I circled him slowly, letting each word land with surgical precision. This is personal. You humiliated me. You used me. You assumed I'd bend without thought, cry without retaliation, disappear without resistance. I stopped behind his chair, my presence like ice pressing against his skin. Did you enjoy thinking you could break me? His lips quivered. A stuttered denial escaped, but it sounded hollow even to him. Yes, I whispered, I know. Then I let the silence do the work. I reached into my bag, pulling out a folder. Everything, I said, letting the word hang in the air. Documents, recordings, everything he thought was hidden. Everything that could ruin him or expose him placed in one neat stack. I slid it across the table. No drama. No shouting. Just facts. His eyes widened. How? I shook my head, cutting him off. Don't ask how. Don't try to negotiate. You built this world assuming I was weak. That assumption ends now. I let him sit with the weight of my calm. It was colder than any scream he could have heard. More powerful than any attack he could have mustered. And far more terrifying. By the time I left the room, Michael's face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. The boardroom whispered behind closed doors. Some thought I was ruthless. Some thought I was brilliant. Some simply watched, knowing power had changed hands. And for the first time I felt it. Not satisfaction. Not vengeance. But quiet, absolute control. The man who had humiliated me, manipulated me, and plotted against me, was unraveling before my eyes. And it had cost him everything. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen. He's reaching for a final move. Are you ready? I smiled. Yes. I was ready. The calm before the storm was no longer calm. It had a pulse. It had a rhythm. It had a scent that only I seemed to recognize. Desperation, fear, and the faint whiff of his last illusions crumbling. I knew Michael would make one final move. He always did. The type of man who betrays everyone, assumes the world revolves around his cleverness. And the higher they climb, the harder they fall. It arrived at 3:17 p.m. A subtle ping on my encrypted phone. From Lena. Meet me. Now. He's trying to flee tonight. I didn't hesitate. I didn't question. I simply moved. New York streets stretched gray and endless beneath the winter sky. My boots clicked against the pavement, each step precise, each thought sharper than a blade. Lena waited in the shadows of a deserted parking garage 10 feet away, shoulders tense, face pale but determined. We didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. Our shared knowledge of him was enough. Enough to bind us into an unspoken alliance. Enough to prepare for the final shift. Michael had always been careless. He had assumed that after our confrontation, after the documents were exposed, he could still maneuver unnoticed. He was wrong. From multiple angles I tracked him that evening. From his apartment to the airport shuttle. From the private cab he hailed to the remote hangar where he'd planned to escape the country. He didn't see me watching. He didn't hear the phones quietly pinging. He didn't know Lena had slipped inside the hangar and disabled his escape vehicle. And when he finally realized he was trapped, the panic in his eyes was instantaneous. Pure, unfiltered. I didn't need to confront him directly. Not yet. The trap wasn't physical. It was emotional, financial, legal, and psychological all at once. Everything he had relied upon to stay one step ahead? Gone. Vanished. Rendered useless by a network of carefully orchestrated moves he never anticipated. I walked into the hangar moments later. He froze, the shadows exaggerating his panic. Clara, you can't. I smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile. The kind that conceals storms. I've already won, I said softly, each word deliberate. You just didn't realize it. He tried to bargain. Promises, excuses, threats. But all the power he thought he had evaporated the second I stepped into the room. The authorities were already en route, alerts triggered silently via contacts Lena and I had secured. Investors and legal teams were notified. His offshore accounts frozen. The assets he thought were untouchable, seized. He was left with nothing. No escape. No leverage. No illusions. And he realized, all along, the woman he underestimated had been 10 steps ahead. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I didn't humiliate. I simply turned and walked away. The hangar echoed with the sound of his collapse figuratively and literally. And I felt an unfamiliar serenity, a quiet empowerment that comes not from destruction but from precision. Outside, the New York skyline glimmered as the last light of dusk settled on the streets below. I paused, hands tucked in my coat pockets, and let the city hum beneath me. It wasn't revenge that satisfied me. It was the control, the orchestration, the knowledge that every step, every pause, every observation had led to this, a complete reversal of power. The woman he assumed would crumble had rewritten the rules of the game. As I turned the corner and merged with the thrumming life of the city, my phone buzzed once more. A single message from Lena. He's gone. Now, what will you do next? I smiled quietly. The answer was clear. The empire of his lies had crumbled. But my life? My life was just beginning. The city didn't pause for my victory. New York never did. Its relentless hum, its constant rhythm, continued as if nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted. I had shifted it. I walked through the streets with no one chasing me, no one fearing me yet but carrying the invisible weight of all I had orchestrated. It was not chaos I sought but balance. Not destruction but reclamation, and the silence of my triumph felt louder than any scream. The first thing I did was secure my life. Accounts were cleared. Names were changed. Passwords reset. Every digital trace Michael had exploited was now mine, fully under my control. Lena helped in the background, navigating legalities and settlements I had never wanted to face myself. Together, we ensured Michael could not rebuild, and no one could touch the network of lies he had woven. By the time the news settled, I had reclaimed everything he thought belonged to him. My reputation, my finances, my autonomy. It was quiet, almost invisible, but far more powerful than public spectacle. Because real power, I had learned, does not need applause. I returned to the apartment, the place that had once held betrayal in its walls. Every object, every frame, every shadow had been tainted by lies. And yet, I didn't burn it down. I didn't smash or throw or erase. Instead, I rearranged, removed what hurt, kept what reminded me of clarity, strategy, and endurance. Even the smallest changes, a fresh coat of paint, rearranged furniture, light flowing differently through the curtains, felt like reclaiming my own gravity. Every corner now whispered resilience, not pain. By the third week, the board confirmed Michael's removal. Lena had secured her restitution, and the company's investors were stabilizing under my guidance. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't seeking recognition. I was a survivor. And more importantly, I was in control. Control had a quiet elegance. It didn't scream. It didn't boast. It simply existed, and it was mine. People who had underestimated me now moved carefully around me, reading my silence as both an invitation and a warning. Some admired. Some feared. All respected. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed mastery. And mastery is quiet. Mastery is deliberate. Mastery is power unspoken. I walked along the East River one evening, the skyline reflecting perfectly on the water's surface. No one knew what had transpired behind closed doors. No one needed to know. And as the city lights shimmered, I realized the story wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about betrayal, lies, or stolen trust. It was about me, my strength, my intelligence, my timing, my calm in the storm. I had survived. I had won. And I was free. Freedom felt strange, sharp, yet comforting. I didn't need anyone to tell me I deserved it. I already knew. That night, a quiet knock came to my door. A letter slid under it. No stamp, no name. I picked it up. Inside was a single card embossed. Power always finds its owner. I smiled, quietly, because I already had. I often walk the streets of New York alone, not out of loneliness, but out of choice. The city hums beneath my feet, alive with energy, chaos, and possibility. And yet, for the first time in years, I feel a silence inside me that is not emptiness, it is control, clarity, and peace. 2 years. 2 years of devotion. 2 years of compromise. And then betrayal. Humiliation. Deception. I remember the moments vividly, the whispered lies, the hidden accounts, the calculated cruelty. I remember the nights I lay awake questioning my own judgment. And I remember the exact second I realized, strength isn't loud. Strength is invisible, patient, precise. It doesn't scream for recognition. It doesn't demand vengeance. It simply exists. And when wielded correctly, it changes everything. I could have exploded. I could have raged publicly. I could have let anger rule me. Instead, I observed. I calculated. I waited. I understood that every action has consequences. Every lie leaves a trace. Every betrayal is a thread you can follow, if you have patience enough to see the pattern. The moral is simple, though it took me years to internalize. Power reclaimed quietly is far more devastating than power seized in fury. When you control your actions, your timing, and your emotions, you no longer need to fight. You simply allow life and sometimes fate to carry the pieces to where they belong. I am no longer the woman who was humiliated. No longer the woman who trusted blindly. No longer the woman whose identity could be used as collateral in someone else's schemes. I am deliberate. I am patient. I am observant. I am empowered. The city, once a backdrop to my suffering, now mirrors my resilience. Its endless streets remind me that I am free to move, to choose, to shape my life without interference. Betrayal taught me many things. Humiliation sharpened me. Planning revenge forced me to confront not just him but my own limits. And in the end, victory was not about retribution, it was about reclaiming my agency. It was about quiet mastery over a world that once sought to control me. It was about realizing that no one can diminish your strength unless you allow it. I survived. I rose. I prevailed. And now, I am whole. If you've ever felt powerless, remember this. Your patience, your observation, your restraint, they are your weapons. Your silence is your strength. And when you act with precision, the outcome will speak louder than any scream. Thank you for following my journey. If my story resonated with you, leave a comment below sharing your own moments of quiet strength. Subscribe to hear more stories where the underestimated rise, survive, and triumph.